Greetings, this is Celebration. My name is John Savers. I'm your host, and today we'll continue our little series on diversity. Now, Celebration is a program series that generally takes a look at peoples and their cultures and tries to understand what makes them tick, to look at the good, the bad, the indifferent, in pursuit of this interest. And we have been on this little journey of looking at diversity, impelled by President Clinton's urgings and that of other prominent figures. Now, we are here at Celebration emphatically in favor of diversity. We believe in a global heterogeneity and a local homogeneity with local control. We think this best protects the valuable cultures and peoples of the earth, and we think that this is all to the good. However, the fellowship we share with the originators of the call for diversity in this country makes us a little uncomfortable. We are not sure that their aim is in fact for diversity, but rather for a blending, actually, a oneness of the people in pursuit of the demented Masonic vision, a messianic vision of one world, one people, one generic religion, and so forth. But in pursuing this particular matter, we have looked at a number of the forces. We see this as one in which there are illuminated elite at the top, fixing policies, trying to implement them with monetary levers and so forth, propaganda, and this, what might be called the intellectual means. We feel that this represents one arm of a pincer movement against the European-derived people, particularly the white people of this country, white Americans, and we feel that there is a bottom rung, which is a rung which involves primarily co-opted black Americans doing destructive deeds and sort of getting the attention of the middle sector, the white sector, which is caught between this pincer movement. We think that this is an entirely unwholesome matter. We have alluded to an Australian journalist who used the phrase a dirty war. It appears that something like 1,500 white people are killed every year by blacks, and of course the fact that blacks do kill blacks does not really make a difference. We have noted, I will say parenthetically in the past, white power group journalists, media, the big press, networks and so forth, virtually decrying what they call black-on-black crime, with the implications that blacks are crazy not to be aiming their violence at whites or something like this, you know. This is the inference that might be drawn, and I think has been drawn by many, of a nefarious inclination. At any rate, we have taken a hard look at this, a frank look at this. Many people have been very unhappy with me for doing this. I certainly did not do this with the idea of hurting, say, black people in their heart or anything of this sort, and certainly took a long time before making this plunge. But I did so because of the people at the top setting this policy, and not so much on the basis of black behavior, as I feel that blacks are basically pawns in the game. But still in all, they are being used, I feel, and for that reason I am trying to awaken them to this fact, and this program I hope will help to do so. At any rate, presently there seems to be a disenchantment with the things that are shown, but I hope that they will, those who are disenchanted will come to see the value of this particular series. At any rate, we do want to continue. We have had Mr. Jesse Jackson invite this sort of a matter and to sort of get things tuned in. Let's hear from him, shall we? Jackson encourages debate on race. Jesse L. Jackson opened his National Rainbow/Push Coalition's annual convention Wednesday with a call for blacks to participate in the national debate on race that has been called for by President Clinton. The president has raised the race debate, Jackson told reporters at the start of the convention, but so far our scholars have not convened to examine the race question. This is a citation taken from the Washington Post of Saturday, August 2, 1997, page 810, in an article by John E. Yang, Peter Baker, and Terry M. Neal. Well, with this in mind, I thought I would bring forth some scientific or scholarly people to give opinions because I think it's important for all people to understand the distinctions that exist in this country amongst the people and understand the consequences of the process of blending. So let's please attend to the scholars as Mr. Jackson advised. President Bill Clinton has called for a national initiative on race, asking Americans to freely debate racial differences and reach some presumably peaceful resolutions to the conflict. However, as the spotlight has pointed out, and as even the major media has noted, the president has not been truly willing to address the issue head-on. However, there is a growing racial crisis in America, and it's not going to go away. In 1967, during congressional debate over the 1967 Civil Rights Bill, Liberty Lobby frankly opted to bring up the fact of racial differences in testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on Civil Rights, chaired by Senator Sam Ervin, Democrat, North Carolina, who agreed with the testimony. Joining Liberty Lobby's then Executive Secretary W.B. Hicks in testifying was retired Columbia University Professor Emeritus Dr. Henry E. Garrett, past president of the American Psychological Association and then one of the world's leading experts on racial differences. Garrett said frankly, based on years of study, that the racial problem in the United States could not be understood, much less solved, until it was recognized that blacks are substantially different from whites and that proposed civil rights legislation could only do further harm. What is published here is a slightly edited transcript of Dr. Garrett's testimony, published for the first time anywhere. Garrett's testimony follows. The present exacerbation of trouble between black and white has come largely out of a misunderstanding of the civil rights issues and the civil rights laws by both the black and the white. Now, the white man has been made over the last 30 or 40 years, particularly the last 30 years, to feel very guilty. He has been told that he has mistreated the Negro in spite of the fact that the Negro has made more progress in this country than he has anywhere on the face of the earth, that he is responsible for slavery, etc. Now, the black people are immature relative to the white. They are more primitive, they're more childlike, their abstract intelligence is of the average considerably lower. All of the evidence, not just a piece of it, but all of it shows that. The evidence can be drawn from four sources. In the first place, we have the anthropological and the fossil evidence to show that the black race, not inferior, they are immature. In the second place, the Negro's brain on the average is somewhat smaller, somewhat lighter, and somewhat less fissured than the white. And some of the more recent developments in the front lobes are smaller, not so thick in the Negro as they are in the white. I think these differences alone could account for much of the difficulty that we find in the behavior of the two races. On the psychological side, with which I think I ought to be fairly familiar, after 40 years of work in the field, the average intelligence quotient, a white child in the United States is arbitrarily set at 100. That is the way the test was made. The Negro child in the southeastern states has an average intelligence quotient of 80. They overlap. That is, the number of Negroes who do as well as the average white child ranges from 10 to 15%, which means that if you put these children into classrooms indiscriminately, they will be, first of all, confused, and then, to use the famous word, frustrated, and finally, they will be disappointed and drop out or quit. Now, the teachers are afraid to fail them because of reprisals, so what they do generally is to promote them, passing the burden over to the next grade, and the child pushes on up the way he does in New York City by seniority, until finally he graduates because he is old enough to, though he might not be able to read. Now, in the Army tests over 50 years, I have just made an analysis of them. The proportion of Negroes who do as well as the average white man has varied from 14% in 1917 to 12% in 1966. That is, in spite of all the money that has been poured into education of white and black, their comparative standing is the same as it was 50 years ago. Now, that to me seems to mean that there must be a basis for it other than just experience or teaching or bad schools or something of this sort. Let me break in to observe that nothing has really changed in this regard. Recently, Mr. William Gates, Microsoft fame, has put aside $1 billion, or has said that he will set aside $1 billion in a fund to be used for the education, to improve the education of minorities. That is, that there is still this notion amongst the Masonic Marxist types who gave us Lysenko in Russia and so forth, that education can be improved by externals, by prettier, neater, cleaner schools, more clever video, computers with neater icons and so forth like this. It seems like we get nowhere when we are dealing with the Masonic Marxist types, and this is because they do not think they are ideologues. They have already a kind of received messianic truth, and there's nothing that can do anything to alter their way of thinking. Moses himself could not strike their stony brows and bring forth the waters of truth. It's just not possible. But let us continue. The third source of evidence is history. We do know something about the history of black Africa over the last 5,000 years, and we find that in black Africa, south of the Sahara Desert, there was never a literate civilization. There was no system of measurement. The black African did not discover the principles of a plow. He just used the stick, nor of a wheel. The wheel was discovered in the 3rd century BC by the Sumerians in Asia Minor, but the black African didn't get it. He never built a terrace or a bridge any more than a stick across a stream. His architectural achievements were a mud hut and a stockade. Now, all of this is not meant to say that the Negro is necessarily an inferior creature. He isn't. If you take intelligence on the abstract level, that is, the kind of thing which people in schools, in the professions, and in business have to use, numbers and words and diagrams and figures, that is where he falls down, and his history shows it. Well, the history then of the black African gives us every reason to think that he falls significantly below the white man in his intelligence. One has only to look around him to see that in the last 12 or 14 years, we have plenty of evidence of what I have just said. The New York City schools have now become what one author called a custodial institution for children who have no future. Even the Washington Post, which is, well, not a conservative paper, says that the Washington schools are sick. They are not only sick, they are moribund. And you people in Congress know that as well as, or better than I do. The riots and the rest that breaks out is not brought about any special, strange disease. Here you have a childish, primitive sort of people whose thinking is shallow. Now, the record of the Negro in crime in this country is literally scandalous. In 1963, the FBI report showed that the Negro, who constitutes about 10 or 11% of our population, committed 10 times as many murders as the whites, 6 times as many robberies, 7 times as many rapes, and had 10 times as many illegitimate children. Well, let me just break in here and perhaps give you a personalized crime report to sort of make this statistical information this academic is bringing forth more real. So let's do that, shall we? Dangerous friendship led to murders. Rochester, New York. District Attorney Howard Rellin said he negotiated a life without parole plea instead of going for the death penalty for Negro killer Brandon Hall, 21. Rellin said that they could not prove a motive in the slaying of young Ray Ricciuto, 18, and Charles Affelt, 21. They were close friends. The three were drinking at Smoking Joe's bar at 425 Lyle Avenue, where they became intoxicated and boisterous. Thus, the bartender ordered them to leave. They walked to the corner of Fern and Angle Streets, where suddenly Hall pulled out a gun and fired one shot into Affelt's head. He then emptied the gun into Ricciuto's, hitting him in the head, neck, and arms. Both died on the scene. Police were at a loss as to motive since the three were good friends. This is a citation from The Truth at Last, issue number 415, page 4. Further, media suppresses news of black cop murdering white girlfriend. Charleston, West Virginia. This revolting story was not even reported on local TV, nor did the press mention the race of the white victim. West Virginia black state trooper Rodney Robinson fathered a 2-year-old mulatto daughter by Melanie Winfrey. On June 9, they separated and she filed domestic cruelty charges. On the night of July 7, he broke into her apartment in the city of Prosperity. She fled and he chased her in his unmarked police cruiser, firing 2 shots. Finally, Robinson caught her and threw Winfrey into the back seat. 2 other officers pulled up behind him as backup. He pointed his gun at them and told the officers to back off. Robinson then sped off. They tried to follow, but he lost them at high speeds. Some 6 miles away, his cruiser was found behind the Lodestar Energy plant with lights flashing. Her body was in the back seat with 2 bullet wounds from his police service revolver, a .40 caliber semi-automatic. He was seated next to her with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. It was ruled a murder-suicide. West Virginia State Police spokesman Sergeant Rick Robinson had no comment. A police officer, a state police cruiser, a police service weapon, all that should have been national news. Due to his race, it has been totally suppressed. The Truth at Last, issue number 415, page 4. And furthermore, in the same vein, Jacksonville, North Carolina, U.S. Marine Sergeant Robert Davidson, his wife, and 3 children moved into an apartment complex near the base. Also living there was Negro Maurice Sanders, 19, from Chicago. Davidson's 2 sons, Brent, age 6, and Brandon, 10, had just gotten off the school bus and were walking home. Sanders walked up and asked little Brent a question. Before he could answer, Sanders drew a butcher knife and slashed his throat from ear to ear. He died on the spot. His brother ran for help. The children's mother, Virginia Davidson, said, "Why would a 19-year-old kill a 6-year-old boy? Whatever the motive, it can't be realistic." This is from The Truth at Last, issue 415, page 4. And furthermore, and in the same vein, students forced to sodomize each other before being murdered. Steubenville, Ohio. Aaron Land, 20, had just moved into an apartment he was going to share with Brian Muha, 18. Some 12 hours later, they would be on a ride into hell. The pair were students at the Catholic Franciscan University. Muha had graduated with honors from St. Charles High in Bexley. He was to major in biology. Land was from Evergreen, Colorado, majored in business, and was active in the Prodigal Sons, a Christian campus group. On May 30, Negroes Terrell Rame Yarbrough, 18, and Nathan Herring, 18, saw Muha's 1996 Chevrolet Blazer parked in the driveway. They wanted the keys. Thus, at 5 a.m., they broke into the house and tied Land and Muha's hands behind their backs. They locked them in the trunk of the car. From there, they drove across the state line into Pennsylvania. In a wooded area, they took the pair out of the trunk. In a depraved attempt to dehumanize their victims, they forced them to take turns sodomizing each other. Later, prosecutor Stephen Stearns said one, who he would not name, was also raped. At that point, Yarbrough forced the pair to lie face down. Herring would later confess to police that Yarbrough told them, "It's time to put your ass on ice." This is Negro slang for sending someone to the morgue. It would be 5 days later before their decaying bodies would be found. However, the blacks' crime spree was far from over. The very next day, on May 31, they stole a 1995 BMW. They pointed a gun at a Squirrel Hill woman and demanded her keys and took $30 out of her purse and drove off. Yarbrough was also wanted for the November 14 shooting of Devon Fuse. Land's girlfriend, Jen Morrison, said, "I don't think you could find a person better than Aaron. My father died about 5 years ago, and he lost his own father last year. Because of this, we became close friends. He just knew how to be there when people needed someone." This is a citation from The Truth at Last, issue number 415, page 5. Well, now, people, I don't feel that there's reason to offer any more citations of this type. I had thought to do this because I have been chided for basically screening the whole of the United States, trying to find ghastly crimes which blacks have committed and then present to you. And that is not something that I would do. Unfortunately, these kinds of ghastly crimes are not uncommon. And that is one of the things that is being withheld from the public by the dominant news agencies and networks and so forth, because it is a rather frightening kind of thing to read about, as you will probably understand. Now, this is not to say that black Christians are involved in this kind of thing, or that all black people are by any long shot, but it does indicate that something is wrong in the black community, that this kind of thing is happening, and in my point of view, it is that a large number of black people have been co-opted by Freemasonry and has taken on the values of the Snake people rather than the Christian people. Now, I should just say many blacks might criticize me for putting this sort of thing on the air. I will say that I believe that if you're desiring to be in the kitchen, you have to take the heat, and this is part of that process. I do want also to put into the minds of black people, particularly the black Christians, who I think probably share my view that we are deep into end time as it is, that if Revelation is correct, and there is only a remnant of Christian Israel remaining at the last days, why would they suppose that there would be a large number of black people there if there's only a remnant of Christian Israel? Well, I don't think there would be, and I don't think it's reasonable to think that way. I think that only a small number of black Christians would be there. And if only a small number of black Christians are there, does that not mean that there would be a very large number of blacks who would miss the boat, so to speak, who would not be there, who would be in danger of judgment? And if this is so, it must be because they're not doing right, they're not doing the right thing, they are committing sins, crimes, and so forth like this. Therefore, it seems to me that such people are legitimate targets of criticism. And it's not a good thing for these black people to have this covered up. I think it is well put by the black musicians in the popular song when they put forth, "There aren't any gangsters in paradise." Ain't no gangsters in paradise. It's so true, you know, and missionary work could well be aimed in this direction, I think, because there is a great failing. And in thinking about this, also, I will say that both the Old Testament and the New Testament speak about God Almighty writing His laws at some point in the future in the hearts of Israel. Well, of course, it's written in the hearts of Israel. It does not mean in the hearts of non-Israel. Therefore, and I think that here we're also talking about Christian Israel, that is, the Israelites who embrace Christianity. If this is the case, then the law is not written in black hearts. And therefore, it is very, very important for black ministers to preach the law to young blacks and do so frequently, because otherwise it's likely to be missed. It's not in the heart. It has to be in the mind. It has to be put there all the time. And I think that this is a failing. I think that blacks with white hair remember when they were kids going to church, black preachers preaching the law, laying down the straight and narrow, as it were, which may not be the case now.